Yeah, thank you also for inviting me. This project is called Social Class Penalties Around the World, and is joint work with my two supervisors at the University of Konstanz, Sebastian Findeisen and Guido Schwert, and also Simon Wiederhold is part of this project. So let us hop right in. What is the motivation for looking at social class or at class? And I think just a few motivating facts here. So over the past decades, we have increasing evidence, especially from the English-speaking countries, that income inequality is on the rise. And at the same time, we have this large literature that demonstrates that we have constant, or in some countries also declining levels of mobility, which already suggests that something like parental background is getting more important. And then we have a recent working paper by Chetty and co-authors who also demonstrate for the US that also in relative terms, for example, compared to racial gaps, social class seems to get more important in the US over the last few decades. We then asked the question, how important is social class across different countries or in different countries, and we look at this by first estimating what we call social class penalties in different outcome variables. So we look at earnings, education, and skills. Then we attempt a decomposition of these penalties and earnings, where we are mostly interested in how much of these penalties and earnings can be explained by, or can be accounted for by, education and skills. And then lastly, and this is where we are working on also currently, is that we want to find some country-level characteristics that are correlated with these penalties. Also, some information about our sample. I won't talk too much about the data because I think you are all familiar with it by now also. So we again use both cycles, so cycle 1 and cycle 2. Unfortunately, there are some countries missing. So from the first cycle, we don't have information, or we don't have the data on Australia, Russia, Peru, and Indonesia. And then I think Simon already mentioned this, that for the second cycle, we are missing some important variables for some countries that you see listed here. Also, the main results that I'm going to present now exclude Ecuador, Mexico, and Turkey, simply because we don't have enough variation in the parental background or social class times education and earnings cells, but I can also show you, if you're interested, the results with these countries. The point estimates are simply more noisy here, and we restrict the sample also to prime-aged workers between 35 and 54 years of age. And this gives us a final sample of approximately 150,000 individuals. The main variables are then, or the main explanatory variable that we are interested in is the social class indicator, which we construct very simplistically. So it's basically parental education, where we say, okay, if it has, or we define it as follows, that it has the value 1 if at least one of the parents has a college education, and 0 if none of the parents is college educated. And then we look at 3 outcome variables here, which are the logarithm of monthly earnings, where we also use the trimmed monthly earnings and cut off the first and the 99th percentile here. And then we also look at the college education dummy for the respondents, which is then an indicator variable for whether the respondent has a college degree or not. And lastly, we of course also use the numeracy skills in the data set and standardize it within countries such that this is in terms of standard deviations. The estimation strategy is also pretty simple. So we run these within country regressions, where we have our outcome on the left-hand side. Then we are interested in the social class dummy, and we control for gender, polynomials of age, and migration background. In the within country regressions, we include these survey year and cycle fixed effects, and in the pool specification, we additionally include country fixed effects and pool the errors at the country level. And then let's dive right into the results. So first we can look at the penalties in earnings, and what you can see here is on the left-hand side all the countries that we look at, and first thing that can be noted here is that we see substantial differences between individuals with parents that are highly educated and individuals with parents where none of them has college education. There's substantial range in there also, so we see Sweden here at the bottom with a difference of approximately 12%. So in Sweden, an individual that has one parent college, or where one parent is college educated, this individual would earn approximately 12% more, and this ranges all the way up to Chile, where this amounts to approximately 45% or something like that. And if we look at the map of these results, we can also see some interesting geographic patterns where we see that in the northern European countries that you see here at the top of the graph of the map, these gaps seem to be the lowest also in Canada, and if we move further to the south, the gaps seem to increase. An outlier maybe here is New Zealand, where we see also this blue color, which indicates lower gaps. Then we can, of course, also look at the college education of the respondents themselves, and there pretty much the same picture arises. So we see substantial penalties in social class also for the college education of the respondents, so meaning that having a college educated parent increases the likelihood that I myself also attain college education. And again, we see that there's substantial variation also between the countries included in the sample. And if we look at the map again, we basically see a very similar pattern, where in the north we have the lowest penalties, and moving to the south, the penalties seem to increase. And lastly, we can also do the same thing for the numeracy skills, and non-surprisingly, again, the same picture emerges. So we see substantial differences, substantial penalties, where people that have a college-educated parent seem to have higher skills. This again ranges from Sweden here in the bottom of the distribution, where this amounts to 0.38 maybe standard deviations, to all the way up here, where we have in Portugal a difference of 0.8 already. And looking at the map, we can see again that this pattern again holds. So we see in the north again the lowest penalties and skills, and moving to the south, the penalties get higher. We also have further results that I won't go into detail here, but if you're interested, we can talk about them later. First, we have further earnings results, including the countries that I told you we excluded before, so Ecuador, Mexico, and Turkey. Then we also have some results including earning ranks, hourly earnings, and so on. So we can also look at the correlation between the earnings penalties and the education penalties, and also the correlation of our gaps with the correlation when we use a different measure of social class, and we additionally look at some other outcome variables also. Moving on to the decomposition, so here we basically ask how much of the overall penalty in earnings can be accounted for by the differences in education and skills. And here we apply the decomposition of Gelbach to tackle sequencing arbitrariness. So how can you think about this? Very briefly, so it's closely related to the omitted variable bias decomposition, and the intuition is basically that we project each control onto the main explanatory variable, which is here the social class dummy, and then we can see how much of the explained part comes from each control variable. So essentially, we answer the question which controls account for how much of the overall penalty in earnings. How do we do this? So we provide this decomposition within country blocks. So we pool some countries together such that we have these 7 country blocks here. We leave the US alone, then we pool UK, Canada, and New Zealand together. and construct country blocks of Western Europe, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and Asia, and look at the decomposition within these blocks. And the following picture emerges. So here, the size of the overall bar is basically the average size of the earnings penalty within these country blocks, and then you can see how much of this overall penalty in earnings can be explained by education and skills. The dark bar is the part that is explained by education, and what you can see here is that it ranges from 30.3% in Northern Europe up to 55% in Southern Europe. And interestingly also is that the skills add substantially to or add some explanatory power over the skills variation, where we can see that skills explain, in the US, for example, 27.5% of the overall earnings penalty and up to 44.6% in UK, Canada, and New Zealand. Then to the last part of the presentation, where we ask the question whether country-level characteristics can explain differences in the size of the penalties. Here we add some data from the World Bank, the OECD, and the Penn World Tables to the PIAAC data and simply interact the country-level variables with social class indicators in pooled regressions. And here the following picture emerges. So this is first the penalty in earnings, and here we interact the social class variable with economic indicators, labor market institutions, and education institutions. And I will only go through the model 12, where we add all the indicators due to the time. But what you can see for the class penalties in earnings is that we basically have this very obvious relationship that if a country gets richer, the penalty in earnings seems to decline. Then we can do the same for numeracy skills, where we see first that only variables from the education institution section are statistically significant. Here there's a strange result that I cannot really explain so far, but maybe you can help here. So we find that basically increasing the childcare expenditure seems to increase also the penalties in the numeracy skills. And then additionally, we also see that countries that have this early tracking system in place, so early tracking here means that we divide students before the age of 16, seems to increase the penalties we estimate in numeracy skills. And here on the bottom, lastly, we can see that countries with a dual vocational system seem to have lower penalties in numeracy skills. A similar picture emerges then for college education, where again the education institutions are statistically significant. So here we have the relationship with education expenditure and expenditure for tertiary education that you would expect. So if a country spends more for in public education and more for tertiary education, the gap in college education seems to be smaller, and again the relationship between the country having early tracking and the size of the penalties is positive. So countries with an early tracking system in place seem to display higher gaps also in college education. Okay. So to wrap it up, we find social class penalties in earnings, education, and skills in all countries included in our sample. There seem to be large regional differences in the size of the penalties, and the differences in skills and education can already explain a large part of the earnings penalty, which is between 60% and 87% of the overall penalty. And for the country-level characteristics, we do not find consistent pattern yet, but it seems like, for example, early tracking here is positively correlated with the size of the penalties in skills and education. All right, thank you.